Welcome, everyone, to today's webinar, Beyond PSM Audits, Functional Safety Assessments that Expose Hidden SIS Risks. I'm Stephanie, and I'll be your moderator for today's session. Couple quick housekeeping notes before we begin. Today's webinar is being recorded, and we'll make that recording available to you within the next couple of weeks. Please submit any questions you have using the Q&A box in Zoho Webinar, and we'll address them at the end. Charlie will be presenting for about 30 minutes and will reserve the last 10 minutes for your questions. Please also take a moment to review the disclaimer on your screen. The webinar is intended for informational purposes and does not constitute professional advice. The views expressed are those of the presenter, and the session is being recorded, and by participating, you consent to that recording. Today's webinar is the second in our three-part series on functional safety for the process industries. If you missed the first session, Functional Safety for Process Safety Managers, the recording is now available. We'll have the link on the screen at the end of today's session so you can catch up on it or share it with your colleagues. And mark your calendars for the final installment. On May 12th, we'll close out the series with From PSM to Performance, your functional safety deep dive. The registration link and QR code will also be on the screen at the end of the webinar. For those joining an Accutech webinar for the first time, just a brief introduction on us. Since 1994, Accutech has been a global leader in consulting, training, and software solutions for process risk management. We bring deep expertise in both the management and technical aspects of risk, working with organizations ranging from the world's largest companies to government agencies, all with the goal of improving safety, security, and operational performance. So, what are we covering today? Most process safety managers are well familiar with PSM and RBPS audits. They confirm that safeguards are documented, tested, and managed, but they often stop short of a critical question: do those safety instrumented systems actually deliver the risk reduction that's being claimed for them? And that gap is exactly what today's session addresses. Charlie will introduce Functional Safety Assessments, FSAs, a powerful complementary tool that validates SIF lifecycle implementation against IEC 61511. We'll look at real examples from petrochemical, energy, chemical, hydrogen facilities and show how FSAs can take common PSM findings, vague trip documentation, ad hoc testing, unmanaged bypasses, and turn them into targeted actionable improvements. The goal is to help you see FSAs not as another layer of bureaucracy, but as a value-added extension of the audit program you already have. So returning to guide us through today's session is Charlie, Accutech's functional safety lead. As a reminder, Charlie brings over 25 years of engineering and consulting experience in instrumentation, controls and automation, functional safety, and industrial cybersecurity. He's a licensed professional engineer, a project management professional, a certified automation professional, and holds both IEC 61511 Safety Functional Specialist and IEC 62443 Cybersecurity Specialist certifications through ISA. Charlie leads Accutech's SIL verification practice and is a founding member of the ISA Global Cybersecurity Alliance and a member of the FBI's InfraGuard program. If you were with us for webinar 1, welcome back. And if this is your first time joining us, you're in for a great session. Charlie, take it away.
All right. Well, good morning, everyone. I appreciate you guys attending today. I know your time is valuable. I promise you that you're going to get value from this webinar. And by the end, you're going to have information to take back and put it in practice today, even at your facility, at your plant. You're going to have some simple, easy questions to ask your peers, and by that you gauge whether or not, or where you are in terms of maturity of your functional safety life cycle, and whether or not you need to do some of the things we're going to discuss today. But before we get there, I'm going to do a quick poll on who our audience is in terms of background and current roles. So, Stephanie, if you can just trigger that poll for us, see how many PSM managers versus functional safety professionals we have today. That helps me catering the message, right? Or curating the message according to the majority of folks we have today attending. Okay, has that gone yet?
Yep, it looks like we've got a bunch of people that have voted. We've got 42% process safety manager, 11% functional safety professional, and 11% both, and 34% other this time.
All right, good deal. Well, just like our first webinar, most of our attendees are PSM managers, and that is on purpose. I think we catered the webinar series exactly for non-technical folks, even though we will touch a little bit of technical subjects here, technical items here, but the goal is to appeal to that audience that is not doing functional safety on a daily basis, but need to know just enough to ensure that their facilities are in good shape in terms of compliance and in how well they would do if they were to be audited tomorrow, right? Either internal audit or an OSHA audit, for example. So you should be very familiar with PSM audits, PSM assessments, either internal or external. And I want to give you a functional safety perspective to what's not covered in those PSM audits, and give you a little bit of a look into the functional safety life cycle. So with that in mind, today's agenda is why this matters to PSM managers, what an FSA is and what it is not, where FSAs fit in the life cycle, misconceptions that keep sites exposed, what hidden SIS risks FSAs expose, capital projects, why late FSA discovery is expensive, what good looks like, and takeaways to leave with. As I said, there will be some action items that you can apply today. As a reminder, especially for those who were not here for webinar 1, and I must say that these webinars, they're standalone webinars. You don't need to watch webinar 1 to be able to follow or understand webinar 2. If you missed one, it's fine. Webinar 2 is focused on functional safety assessments, as we know. But I want to remind you, this is a slide from the past webinar, that 61511 is a OSHA adopted RAGA gap, right? And we all should know what a RAGA gap is. Recognized and generally accepted good engineering practice. So for safety instrumented systems, IEC 61511 for those international clients, or ANSI ISA 61511 for those in the US, is the recognized standard for safety instrumented systems. OSHA's expectation, SIS design, implementation, and verification follows this standard. The audit reality, however, is that inspectors review for functional safety life cycle documentation. Well, let me clarify. The audit from a functional safety perspective is that the inspectors review for functional safety life cycle documentation. Now, the however that I said that I apply here is that on PSM audits, this is looked at the very tip of the iceberg is looked at, right? So from a functional safety audit reality, the inspectors will review the safety life cycle documentation. From a PSM audit reality, they will not. They will ask you questions under mechanical integrity element, under the PSI element, and almost every element, right? There'll be a question related to maintenance, instrumentation, emergency systems, or safety systems, but very rarely they will go into the functional safety lifecycle documentation. And that's the reason why we have this webinar series, is to show you what is not being covered by your PSM audit, and therefore creates a blind spot in your rear view mirror, right? And we want to avoid that. So compliance strategy is to demonstrate life cycle adherence and design verification. So even though the PSM audit doesn't clearly goes through your functional safety life cycle documentation, the expectation from OSHA is that if they knock at your door, you should be able to demonstrate life cycle adherence and design verification. So that's where the blind spot occurs, because either every 3 years or annually, or however often you're doing your PSM audits, internal or external. I mean, internally or externally by using consulting firms such as Accutech, you want to make sure that the functional safety component is also looked at. And I can emphasize enough, we don't have much space and time to cover this functional safety life cycle under your typical OSHA PSM audit, right? And knowing what the blind spot is allows you to, in addition to your PSM audit, you can run a quick, simple exercise to make sure that your blind spot is covered, that you're able, that you know enough, and you're able to defend your functional safety life cycle with the proper documentation that OSHA expects you to have. So why this matters to PSM managers? So I went ahead of myself here. So this slide covers most of what I just said. PSM programs often touch SISs across the board, yet still leave hidden life cycle weaknesses untested. So what PSM managers already know, everyone here should be familiar with PHA local decisions, the assigned risk reduction, MI testing and procedures that must keep accredited protection real in the field. We discussed that at length in the past webinar, right? How to ensure that the level of integrity on your SIFs after design, installation, and operations are still good, or they still measure up to the requirements or the credit taken to them at LOPA or during PHA in general. MOC and training systems that can either preserve or erode life cycle integrity. Again, these were all looked at webinar 1. Audit and governance expectations after incidents, near misses, and insurance scrutiny. So these are typical, very well-known factors or areas that PSM managers deal with or cover on a daily basis. What this webinar will clarify is what a functional safety assessment actually is and what it is not. Why a PSM audit and an FSA answer different questions. What kind of subtle SIS gaps FSAs expose at operating sites and projects, and how to recognize when a site likely needs an FSA gap assessment or just a simple, quick SIS health check. Beyond the audit. So what the different questions and different blind spots, as I said earlier. So a good PSM audit may confirm that the systems exist, right? Through mechanical integrity, through PSI, and a lot of the other 14 elements. An FSA tests whether the SIS risk reduction continues to work as assumed throughout the life cycle. A PSM audit offers often confirms required elements, procedures, and records are present. PHA revalidation cadence, MI, MOC, and training programs, they exist. They're being executed properly. Testing is being performed. Deficiencies tracked. An FSA probes deeper than that, and it looks into the consistency between the hazard basis, SIL assumptions, SRS, logic, and field implementation. These are all phases of your functional safety life cycle. you could kind of loosely compare that to PSM elements, right? So these are items in the life cycle that we need to look at and have documentation that allows you to defend that you are following, you're compliant with that life cycle. It also provides evidence that proof testing, bypass management, and procedures support the claimed risk reduction. Life cycle drift, and by drift I mean existing installation, existing plants and facilities, older facilities still have paperwork. They still comply. This compliance to the functional safety life cycle, even if it existed originally, it is still valid, right? More times than not, a drift has occurred, and we need, and through an FSA, we pick up on that. We identify what the drift is, and most times we can resolve that fairly quickly. Whether the implemented SIS still matches the intent of the risk assessment, as we discussed at length. The hidden exposure. And these are typical statements that I hear when I'm talking about, or when I'm explaining or defending a functional safety assessment with a client or even peers. So usual statements would be, we thought that safeguard was to protecting us, right? We had a procedure, but it no longer matched the installed system. So that happens when, usually older facilities or when you go through major upgrades. We tested something, but not what the SIL assumption relied on. So if you're not familiar with functional safety, with the functional safety life cycle and functional safety discipline, if you will, you may be testing the wrong thing, right? Or you may be testing the right thing incorrectly. It helps. You should have proof test procedures that kind of walk you through what to test and how to test. But again, if you don't have all the proper documentation, you would be testing. You would be answering those MI questions correctly. You would be getting a check mark, a green light on MI, because you're saying, yes, we are testing. But are you testing it correctly? And are you testing the right thing? We caught the gap only when a startup or an incident forced the issue. So this happens a lot when FATs or maybe SATs are bypassed or skipped, and then you don't see you don't find an issue until commissioning, startup, or even early in operations. So what do you mean? This is a question I'm sorry. This is an item that I came across not long ago with one of the FSAs that I was doing. Is that basically the LOPA listed a series of SIFs. The functional safety documentation had those SIFs listed. I don't remember how many. All the SIFs were accounted for everywhere, except in the logic. It was not part of the logic. So basically, we were missing a SIF. Documentation pristine, all the SIFs were there. Software in the PLC, there was a missing SIF, and that was never caught until commissioning, until we were doing FSA 3, which is the PSSR equivalent, the pre-startup safety review equivalent to functional safety, right? It would be the functional safety equivalent to your PSM PSSR. So that's our FSA stage 3. So we were conducting that FSA 3, and a colleague of mine, another Accutech functional safety engineer, picked up on that the SIF was completely missing. And had we not done the FSA 3, that unit would be operating without one of its main protection methods, right? A whole SIF missing. So you don't pick on that. You don't pick that up. You don't pick up on these issues unless you are going beyond a PSM audit, unless you're doing an FSA, right? And with that reminds me of another presentation that I've given on the differences between random and systematic failures, right? We must understand that the random failures, the equipment failing, random failures, which involves failure rates of SIF equipment, those are considered during SIL calculations. So we run all sorts of equations, we run all sorts of modeling that cover random failures, right? How often that device might fail, and we may even end up with a random failure. There's nothing we can do about those, right? Maybe you can do redundancy to prevent, if one device fails, the other one is still there. But there is also, you should also pay attention to systematic failures. So again, one is the random failures, which you may not have control over. Equipment failed randomly. And the other one is systematic failure, in which the process has failed to catch an issue, right? Or the process has drifted in a way that it's not looking at everything it should be looking at. And that has to do with that blind spot between the PSM, a PSM audit, and an FSA, which is the functional safety assessment. What it is and what it is not. So an FSA is an evidence-based assessment of your life cycle at a defined stage of the life cycle. We'll see the stages. A way to test alignment between the hazard analysis or the hazard basis, requirements design, all the way through the operational reality. A mechanism to surface latent gaps, right? Again, blind spots before they become startup delays, impairments, or incident findings. You don't want to find out that you don't have a SIF until that SIF is needed and it doesn't prevent an accident. A strong complement to PSM by translating risk reduction assumptions into verifiable evidence. What it is not, it's not just a document, it's not just a documentation tidy up exercises, even though I am aware that a lot of FSA assessors, they focus on the documentation and the documentation only, right? Most and foremost. Of course, we must have the documentation, but we have to go beyond the documentation and look into the software and look into a series of other things that go along with the documentation. So it's not the same as a general PSM audit where compliance walkthrough. It does not only apply to greenfield projects, and it's never too late to do simply to do it simply because the unit has been operating for years. Another thing that I hear a lot is, this unit is 10, 20 years old. We've never done an FSA. Now it's too late to do it. We don't need to do it anymore, right? Because we should have done it at the very beginning. Well, it's never too late, right? You want to know, you want to identify those blind spots. You want to identify what issues you may have, and then develop do a gap assessment and develop a program to prioritize and tackle these. One client one time told me, "Oh, I don't want to know. I would rather not know than know and know that there is nothing I can do about it right now because the budget is tight or whatever reason it was at the time. I don't remember, but he told me, I don't even want to know. So I'm not going to do an FSA because there is nothing I can do about it." And I find that statement ridiculous because you have to know, right? Even if there is nothing you can do today, you need to know what your weaknesses and deficiencies are so you can act upon them as soon as you can. So where do FSAs fit in the life cycle? So here we focus on the first three stages for projects. So running an FSA 1 or carrying out an FSA 1 right after you complete your HAZOP and LOPA, running FSA 2 right after you do your detailed design, or maybe during detailed design. This one is as well could be done in the beginning of detailed design. FSA 3 before startup, before commissioning. You cannot commission, start up, or I should say, you cannot start up without FSA 3 being completed. If safety instrument system applies to you, if you have that in your facility or equipment that you're bringing online. And FSA 4 and 5 during operation and major changes. Those are going to be done, after the system has been operating for a while. But the most practical message is simple. The earlier the life cycle checkpoint, the cheaper the correction. And we're going to see why. Misconceptions that keep sites exposed. Here are some jewels that I've heard in the past. We already do PSM audits, so we are covered. And no, we already discussed that you're not covered because we don't ask enough questions about your functional safety systems, or we don't ask enough functional safety oriented questions on your PSM audits. Yes, you do have functional safety questions under MI and others, but they cover only the tip of the iceberg. It is too late to do an FSA now, or I would rather not know, which was my reaction, like, yikes, FSAs are only for new projects. I've also heard that one. Our existing facilities are not eligible, or we don't need to do what is already existing and proven that it works correctly. No, that's not true. Projects need staged assessments, but brownfield units also need life cycle reality checks. I also refer to them as reality checks. This is an engineering detail, not a PSM management issue. Well, safety instrument system risk lives inside PHA, LOPA, MI, MOC procedures, impairment control, incident defensibility. So imagine your day in court. Imagine that there is a tragic incident in your facility. What are you going to tell the judge or the lawyers when they ask you, are you following RAGAGAT? Are you doing what your industry peers are doing? And if you cannot defend, if you cannot produce functional safety documentation, which includes your functional safety assessment reports, you are not going to be able to defend yourself. What hidden risks FSAs expose at operating sites? So basic risks, things such as trip set points that are sometimes changed, cause and consequence logic, actions that no longer reflect current hazard basis. These may not apply to everyone, and you may say, well, I cannot do these things on a safety instrument system because everything is controlled, requires MOCs and approvers and whatnot. But we see plenty of these, right? Where people fix things in the middle of the night, and a lot of times, even if an MOC exists, it doesn't properly cover the effects of that change all the way through your safety instrument system design. So there becomes an integrity risk, right? Now you have assumptions. You have calculations that cannot be substantiated anymore because things have changed. Change risk, brownfield modifications quietly altering independence, voting procedures. Again, we're talking about potential changes that were made over time, small changes that a lot of times cause that drift, right, between what the documentation says and what the reality in the field is. So I ask you, do we go back and retroactively generate missed MOCs or PSSRs, right? If we realize that we missed something, are we going back and redoing everything and evaluating all the risks throughout your functional safety life cycle? Most of the times you don't. You don't go through that trouble. PSM audit is going to give you a gap assessment. You're going to start applying those rules or those lessons learned moving forward, but you don't go back and try to retrace and see how that affected you, or in this case, safety instrument system. Representative operating site findings. So here are some examples. It goes from accredited SIF could not be cleanly traced from LOPA. A SIF exists, but it's conflicting, that there is conflicting information or conflicting operation to what LOPA intended it to be. The SIF is functioning in a way that differs from the LOPA recommendation, right? Or another thing is during LOPA, credits were given to layers that are not, let's say, independent, right? They are independent at first glance, but during an FSA, during a functional safety assessment, we realized that those sensors, those valves are not independent in reality, right? They ended up being designed in a way that there is a common factor there. So you lose independence. Partial stroke or diagnostic coverage was assumed in calculations, but in reality, they are not being done. Logic changes were made during turnaround or during commissioning and not properly vetted or documented. Bypass procedures existed, but prolonged impairments. On this one, another one of our functional safety engineers is currently doing a SIL verification for a client, and the client has a bypass a button there on their SIF, but they do not have a bypass procedure. So even though there is a button there is a bypass that exists in the design, the client, for lack of maturity, or even their EPC never asked the questions, are you following 61511? Do you have documentation to in compliance with 61511? And if you did, you would have a very robust bypass procedure in place. But if you do not follow that RAGA gap, if you're not aware that you're supposed to follow that RAGA gap, you may not have a procedure to cover bypass of SIFs. And operator actions credited in the risk basis were not fully supported by alarm, etc. These are more particular situations, may not apply to everyone. So mini case pattern, we thought it was too late. That's what I said earlier, that in a particular case, client was defending by saying, oh, it's too late now, we don't need to do it. And here I list some reasons why it's never too late, right? And that's a discussion that occurs during brownfield audits or brownfield assessments, when we start asking questions about why we're missing FSAs or why FSAs were never done prior. So I'll leave it at that for sake of time here. So what the site looked like, what the assessment uncovered. Here's some examples of things that we found and why it mattered, right? The difference it made in that particular case. Now, going from a brownfield to a greenfield on a capital project, why is late FSA discovery expensive? Well, they get expensive. The longer it takes for you to identify gaps, the more expensive the more expensive it gets, budget-wise and schedule-wise, to close those gaps. Big or small, it doesn't matter. So project teams, because of lack of knowledge, right? Usually lack of guidance from either an EPC company or internal design team. Project teams rarely regret doing life cycle checks project teams, they rarely regret doing life cycle checks too early. What I was thinking about saying here is that they actually rarely budget cost and schedule wise to do FSAs, and then find out later on in a project stage closer to maybe a SAT or a commissioning startup, they realize that FSA should have been done throughout the project stages, right? So we end up finding gaps, and those gaps, they end up being costly, not only financially, but may hold your project back weeks, if not months, while that gap is being addressed. That's the message we get from this slide. And again, consequences in terms of life cycle pain, and I've seen projects in which there were commercial terms that the startup should be in a month, and now a gap. We found a gap that is holding the project for an additional month. So it's not going to be another 60 days until the client can get that gap properly closed and do a startup. So now we're dealing with, not only it's more expensive cost-wise and budget-wise, but now you have a fine to pay because you're not agreeing, you're not following through with the commercial terms that you signed, right? You're not starting up on that agreed upon date with your client. Functional safety assessments. This is a slide from webinar 1. It's a visual just to indicate you with what we already said on a different slide. It just shows you where, it gives you a visual. It helps you understand where these FSAs need to take place, right? And a lot of time, most times, the client gets stuck or learns about it when they come across FSA 3, which is the first required one, right? And it is required by 61511, but one of its items, its bullet points under it is go back and do FSA 1 and 2. So even though FSA 1 and 2 are quote unquote optional, you start FSA 3, and the first 2 items on FSA 3 is, has an FSA 1 been done, has an FSA 2 been done, and its gaps closed. So that means that even though they're optional, you will eventually have to go back and do them anyway. So you might as well do them at the proper time, and any gaps or findings can be addressed quickly and way less costly than waiting until we are ready to push the start button to handle them. Here, another slide from webinar 1. I just pasted here to remind you guys. We quickly went through this one with the gap being FSAs are often unplanned. Again, a little repetitive, nevertheless being presented in a slightly different angle. Solution budget FSA as a capital project cost, not an afterthought. So FSAs need to be part of that original CapEx or OpEx budget if we're talking about FSAs 4 and 5. They need the client or the owner operator needs to be aware of those and know when to do them and have those funds available. Integrating FSA into project and operation schedules, so it doesn't have to disrupt your project. It doesn't need to disrupt operations. If done properly, they can run in parallel. You don't need, it won't delay you. And the timeline here, this is just an example, depends obviously on the number of SIFs, the number of functions, and the complexity of your design or system. There are 2 important clauses under 61511, the FSA section of 61511, that is the team independence clause and the cyber requirements clause, where a team, you should, for an FSA assessor, in terms of independence, the FSA assessor or assessors, if it is an FSA team, requires at least 1 senior, competent, independent from the work being assessed person to take part in the FSA. So the common question that I get is, can I use internal resources instead of hiring you to do my FSA, right? Instead of hiring an outside consultant such as Architect. Well, yes and no. So in larger companies, so we're talking about major operators, right? Multinational firms. In larger companies, internal teams may be utilized, and they often are. You were doing a project in the Gulf of Mexico, your project team is in Houston, you bring someone from maybe a different part of the country or even an office in Europe to do the FSA for you. That person reports a completely different chain of command, is not under too much pressure, which would occur if that person is part of the project team, or reports to that same director who needs to get that project delivered. So that assessor needs to be independent from the project facility. Larger companies may use internal assessors, but they should not report to the same chain of command, be employed at that facility, or be part of the project team. Additionally, the project size and complexity will also dictate whether or not internal teams are defendable, right? Depending on if it's a large project, if it's a complex project, you may need to hire outside consultants to properly take that bias away, right? Mini case pattern. I have a couple of cases here for you, and you all are going to get access to the recording, to the presentation. I have, in this case here, it's a startup scramble, nobody budgeted for. This is based on that example that I told you, that we went from having, I don't have a date, I can't recall the date, I don't know if it was November 1st, that the unit should start producing. And it wasn't until I think early January until we're able to get that unit started up and producing. And that was due mostly because FSA gaps and findings that needed to be closed. So that was a major surprise, major cost involved, a lot of negotiation between the parties to avoid fines and avoid the client just walking away from the project, period. Self-diagnostic, does your site likely need a gap assessment? So if several of these sound familiar, there is a strong case for targeted FSA gap assessment or SIS health check, which is not an FSA gap assessment, but is a simpler, quicker exercise to at least catch a glimpse of whether or not you need an FSA, right? So common red flags: no clear history of FSAs. Again, the FSAs are required. So if you say you're following RAGA gap, you're required to do them. So if you don't have a history of doing them, you're not compliant. You can defend yourself in court, properly defend yourself, right, in terms of your safety instrument system. Your assumptions are hard to trace, documentation is incomplete, proof test intervals, things that are not clearly matching in terms of design and PHA analysis versus what is installed and how often and what procedures they're using to test those devices or those functions. And frequent bypasses and overrides, right? More red flags. I list more here, especially, and I differentiate them. I even note brownfield changes, but the other ones apply for greenfield cases as well. So as a rule of thumb, if 3 or more are true, start with a scoped FSA gap assessment. Right, we can run a small exercise to at least tell you what the blind spots look like, right? How big it is, and what FSA you require, if you require any FSA at all. What good looks like, integrating FSA thinking into PSM. So the strongest programs do not treat SIS lifecycle work as a separate island, which is most cases what I see as a functional safety engineer and as a PSM auditor. They connect it to existing PSM ownership points. On webinar 1, I said, as a PSM manager, everything falls under you, including your functional safety systems. So just because you're not aware that an FSA should have been done or needs to be done, it doesn't mean that you are in good terms or you are covered, right? So everything falls under you, and you need to be asking these questions to your functional safety engineers, to whoever you have in house that understands and is aware of 61511 or can do some research for you on 61511 requirements and answer whether or not you are compliant to it. Don't rely on just the PSM audit itself to tell you that, or get some external consultants, right? But here are some elements and the typical findings or the typical things that will tell whether or not you are being compliant, right? So how to integrate that FSA thinking into PSM. What to do next, practical starting point. So for operating sites, I give a list of some things to go through or to follow. For project new installations, also some items that are of importance, like budget, time for closure of findings, and define evidence expectations, treat lifecycle readiness as a startup prerequisite, right? So don't, it is a startup prerequisite, but don't wait until then to take action. On the operating sites, identify with SIS risk reduction as being actively credited, and then trace that all the way to operations, which is what we discussed in the last webinar. So these lists, please go through them at your, or take them back with you, right, to your facility, and start going through them with one of your engineers, one of your subject matter experts, and see what the answers are, see where you stand. Questions that I often get asked by PSM managers: how is a gap assessment different from a formal staged FSA? Can we do this unit by unit rather than site-wide? What documents do we need to start? How disruptive this is for operations and maintenance, and what are the fastest high-value checks on an operating site? So the answers to that is a gap assessment. It is the most practical first step for sites that lack confidence in their historical life cycle coverage. It surfaces high-value issues and helps define what deeper staged work is needed. So that would be a difference there between the two. Is it too late if the unit has been operating for years? No, it's never too late. The late assessment does not create the risk. It reviews life cycle drift, as we talked about. Do we need a full site-wide program immediately? No way. Usually, you know, we as the saying goes, right? You eat an elephant bite by bite, right? So we encourage a unit by unit or a risk prioritized scope, especially where SIS risk reduction is actively credited. If you're currently doing PHAs and LOPAs at a particular unit, a particular facility, that is a good one to start with, or a good one to, you know, to take the time and cover that, since you're revisiting or revalidating your PHAs. But no, you can take it unit by unit. You can take it. You can break your facility into areas and sections and build a schedule, right? You don't need to resolve it all in one day overnight, but at least you need to put a plan in place that will eventually get you to a mature level in which you are positive that you're compliant with 61511. And well, what documents do we need to start? So usually you need your PHA, your cause and effect, your SRS, your typical functional safety documentation to start with. If you don't have those documents, if you cannot find those documents, we can help you locate those documents. We can ask you a series of questions that will help you dig out comparable information. A lot of companies, especially us dealing with customers globally, tend to call things differently. Even deliverables are called differently, and we help you locate that information. And the documentation doesn't need to be complete, and that's one of the reasons you're doing an FSA, is to identify what needs to be, what is missing, right? And okay, and back on the doc. Actually, I went ahead of myself answering those questions. So here's usually enough to start, helpful but not always available. And the key message: do not delay because the document set isn't perfect. An assessment often helps review what's missing and what matters most. Yeah, and you have a good cheat sheet here to go through with your SMEs or an external consultant, such as Ecotech. How disruptive is this for operations and maintenance? It doesn't have to be. Usually it is not. If it's well planned, if you have good FSA assessors, if it's not their first FSA, you can usually schedule it in a way that it's running parallel, either with operations or in parallel with your project phases. So get some experienced FSA assessors. Don't in some cases I get clients asking me, oh, can you train so and so? I mean, we have a functional safety engineer. Can he take can he get TUV certified and then start doing FSAs for us in-house, right? Much cheaper. He's already in the payroll. We don't need external consultants. And most times than not, it's not worth it. Either you're gonna miss things, you're gonna do it incorrectly, and you may get in trouble in terms of defending your decisions later on if an accident happens. But real quick, in closing here, if we go back to that two clauses in independence and competency, so we talked that I emphasized independence from the project team or that facility or chart, but there is a competency as well. At least one senior competent. And by competent, that person needs to be at least certified, TUV certified or Exodus certified or ISA certified. Ecotech, we usually help our clients that are not yet certified. We help them by getting them TUV certified using one of our partners. We offer TUV functional safety engineer certification, and we can prepare him. He tags along with us on the first FSA, and from then on he can carry out his own internal FSAs and use us as someone as a soundboard or advisor or mentor on future FSAs that they are running in-house. And with that, I went over time, but I think that we covered the topic well. You have plenty of questions and statements to go through here in the presentation with your team back home, back at work, and to understand whether you need to take action and when to take action, right? All right, Stephanie.
Thanks, Charlie. We will hopefully have time to answer a couple of questions, but before that, we have a quick poll we'd like you to participate in. This will only take a moment and it'll directly help shape the topic of our third webinar, which we are leaving in your hands. So help us pick that topic. What would you like to see Charlie cover in the last webinar on May 12th? Take a moment to vote. There's no wrong answers, just your priorities, and we'll share the results with you in just a moment. We've been doing this poll on LinkedIn and the previous webinar, so we'll take a look at the results from all three and pick a topic and announce it shortly. All right, I'll wait for a couple more votes to come in. All right, thank you all for voting. And I'll publish the results so that you can see them now. But like I said, we'll take a look at the polls from the previous webinar too. Charlie, it looks like we're at 44% how to align PHA LOPA risk, that topic, much like the other two polls, so we'll see. So, okay, let's get to a couple of your questions from Charlie. Don't worry if we don't get to your question, we'll follow up after the fact. So let's start with this one. I know these were coming in first, and it's actually kind of a two-part question. Would MI be part of FSAs such as ESD, PSV verification? And then following my previous question, so FSA would be just still verification, like SIL 1, 2, and 3, I guess is what I'm reading.
Yeah. So to clarify, the functional safety assessments, they are in parallel to your PSM elements, right? They go in parallel to your PSM program, and they focus on functional safety, of course, and functional safety lifecycle requirements. So we start with the required documentation that you must have for your safety integrity systems, your safety instrumented systems. And then we analyze that we don't stop there. A lot of people stop there. Oh, you have an SRS, check. You have proof test procedures, check. And so a lot of FSAs, you see out there can be done very, very quickly, but they're not effective. So we first identify if you have all the required documentation, and then we go through your documentation and make sure that everything is matching, right? Starting from HAZOP and LOPA with all the safety functions and the credit that was taken for those safety functions, all the way to how was it designed that way, the way it was intended, and is it operating the way it is intended? Is being tested the way that proof test procedures require it to be tested, and it's being tested as often. So we review all the required documentation and make sure that your system has a perfect traceability and it is defensible, right? You can defend it. You can say, you can prove you are compliant with 61511. So having said that, the long answer to your question, having said that, it's not just MI, it's not just PSV verification. As a matter of fact, we are just interested in your safety instrumented functions, right? So PSV verification, we don't touch at that. You should be doing that as part of MI. You also mentioned SIL verification. SIL verification is required, right? And we do go through it, and we make sure that it's being properly done and that it reflects the conditions, the scenario, and the requirements when that SIF was born during LOPA, right? When the need for this SIF first became a reality during LOPA. Long answer. Hopefully I answered your question. If not, I can follow up via email as well. And the other two questions, the difference between LOPA and FSA. So the LOPA is your part of your process hazardous analysis, right? You do your HAZOP and LOPA, and the SIFs are born there, right? LOPA is going to tell you how many SIFs you need and what they need to look like and how they need to perform. And the FSA is basically an assessment that was done properly. Not only that, but the rest of the life cycle was done properly. Now, FSA 1, it is done after HAZOP LOPA, and it covers, we review your HAZOP LOPA scenario by scenario and make sure that that scenario was analyzed correctly and the credits that were taken were properly taken. You didn't take too much or too little. It was just right. So FSA 1 covers the LOPA, does not replace your LOPA. What is the status of AI involved in LOPA and FSA? AI in LOPA, that is a big discussion. I can refer you to somebody else within Accutech that can, have a great conversation with you regarding AI in HAZOP and LOPA. But AI and FSA, it may help us go through your documentation quicker if we use AI, but it's not replacing the assessor. It's not a system that can be easily replaced by AI, except in documentation, processing documentation. So that's it. The webinar was our webinars are originally 30 minutes, and we reserve 15 minutes for questions. And Stephanie is our organizer here, and I must apologize. Sorry, Stephanie. Every time I go over, but hopefully you guys got value out of it. If you're able to stay longer, if not, I guess the recording will be available too. Well, thank you guys. Thank you, everyone. Let me go to our last slide here. Thanking you.
So like you said, the recording will be available in the next couple of weeks. We'll send you a link once it's posted. If you missed webinar 1, that recording is now available. You can see a link and a QR code to it here. And of course, we have the link and QR code to register for the 3rd webinar. And if you need a PDH certificate for today's session, please email us at contact@accutechconsulting.com and we'll get that right out to you. I guess thank you again, and a big thank you to Charlie for another outstanding presentation. And we look forward to seeing you on May 12th for the 3rd webinar. Thank you, everyone.
And I must say, if you allow me, Stephanie, that if you have any questions regarding the contents and regarding your specific case, don't hesitate to email us. I will reply. I don't mind answering your questions, helping you as much as I can. Thank you, guys.